Hey friends, joined here with a very special guest, Professor Hoornweg, who is a professor here at Ontario Tech University, who specializes in energy systems and energy flow within different cities. So welcome.
Thank you.
Professor Hoornweg, do you want to share a little bit more about your research yourself and what you do here at the university?
Sure. So I came to the university fairly late in my career. Most of my career was spent first in solid waste management, and then I was at the World Bank for 20 years working on sustainability and urban issues around the world. And then coming here to Ontario Tech, I focused on energy and material flows around the world, different countries, but most of the energy and material flows, whether it's stuff we use, stuff we eat, or material that we throw out as garbage, comes from our cities. So focusing on urban aspects, and then looking at the big picture of energy, whether it be in Ontario, and how all the pieces sort of fit together. And ideally, the sum of the whole for the energy system is greater than the individual parts.
Great. No, that's awesome. And energy is such a hot topic, especially right now with the world facing the energy crisis, right? And you see a huge shift toward almost like a nuclear renaissance. So could you tell me a little bit more about the energy crisis that we're facing right now and maybe how your research fits into that?
Sure. Let's see, there's a couple big drivers of the energy transition. One is probably the biggest is climate change, and fossil fuel combustion is contributing significantly. It's 80% of our total greenhouse gas emissions, and the world is more or less, well, we woke up to it in the 80s, but we've more or less got around to putting together a program where we've said, okay, we're going to address climate change. And that basically means getting out of fossil fuels. So that fundamentally changes energy. The other aspects that we have is we have a war in Ukraine, for example. So people are starting to say, wait a second, we now need to look again at energy security, the whole geopolitics of how it all fits together. And then probably a third aspect of energy that we're heading into is as we make this energy transition to net zero, we're doing it within a new world where climate variability is significantly increased. So we have hotter temperatures, we have bigger storm events, we have more flooding. So there's a premium on energy resilience. So that's the sort of the third factor that we're working on. And then there's the issue of equity. We still have 1 billion people in the world that don't have access to electricity. And depending on the country, Canadians use, there's the equity issue. Canadians use probably about 150 times more energy per person than somebody, say, living in Sudan. So those are the big sort of drivers of trying to come up with new energy systems.
It's remarkable how challenging this situation is, right? And looking in the horizon and seeing the need for electricity, the climate change, and then the whole equality and equity situation across the world. Where do we start, right?
Well,
what do you think is the most important topic to confront first?
Probably where you start, it depends where you are. So for example, in Ontario, we're pretty good in terms of electricity. Our average carbon intensity of the grid is averaged out over annually is less than 50 grams per kilowatt hour, probably closer to 30, which is among the best in the world. That gives you bragging rights. We have some days where we're at 5 grams, which is lower than anywhere else in the world. That's pretty good. But we have a big problem in that in Ontario, less than 30% of our total energy consumption is electricity. The big chunks are transportation and building heating. So those now need to be decarbonized, and the only way you can, or the best way you can do that is through electrifying a lot of things. So electric vehicles, heat pumps, and then moving to hydrogen and all of those require more electricity. So ISO is saying, hey, Ontario, you need to more than double your electricity generation between now and 2050, which is only, what, 27 years? And we know that we're not very fast. It takes us a long time to build anything. So we're kind of screwed when it comes to electricity in terms of keeping it low carbon and doubling the amount that we have. So that's for Ontario. If you're in a country like Nigeria, well, Pakistan's a good example. Pakistan basically said to the world, because of to a large extent, the war in Ukraine and the challenge of getting LNG, because the price has gone up significantly, Pakistan said just last week, sorry folks, we can't afford to buy LNG, we're going back to coal for our electricity. So that's the issue in Pakistan, is how do you get out of coal? So there's quite a few countries. The highest rate of coal combustion was 2022, and 2023 will probably beat it. So we're going completely globally in the wrong direction. Coal consumption is increasing. Germany is increasing its coal consumption. So those are big issues. So depends where you are. Quebec, they want to increase their hydro. They want to move to hydrogen and much more electric vehicles. The U.S., it has the new, the Biden IRA, their big program to try and decarbonize and increase resilience. It's a huge amount of money that's being channeled towards moving away from coal for electricity and increasing electric vehicles. That's their priority. So yeah, depends where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like a lot of countries are having facing similar obstacles, weaning themselves off coal and also the transportation sector. So, one thing I wanted to ask you about is, I recently went to Japan and I, experienced the whole transport system there, right? How efficient it is and how, how cheap it is and convenience. You don't even need a car. So I was wondering that here in Canada, everything is pretty much in one line, right? Here in Ontario especially, right? Like from in Toronto all the way, like our population density is heavy in one area. What are your thoughts on, in North America, us implementing some sort of a transportation system that's similar to Japan's or South Korea's?
I don't know if it needs to be similar to Japan or South Korea, but we should have a made in Ontario transportation plan. That would be, if somebody said, what is the single biggest thing we could do to improve well-being in Ontario's economy, and reduce our overall greenhouse gas emissions, it would be fix the transportation system. Our transportation system in Ontario is plagued by a couple things. One is when the federal government sold the rails, they actually sold the alignment, the rails themselves. So the Toronto-Montreal corridor is well beyond capacity. So you have passenger trains fighting with freight trains, and the rail companies have a big preference for freight because they make way more money on freight than allowing via rail for a few trains here and there. So that's a big bottleneck there. I think also in Ontario we suffer from this. It's like the Blue Jays. When the Blue Jays started losing, everybody on the team always was going for a home run. Nobody was happy with just a single. So we have the same thing with transportation where, we need a rail. We need a rapid transit rail line from Kitchener to Toronto, and then we need a high-speed rail from Toronto to Montreal. And really, which is all true, but that's always 10, people love to make jokes about fusion. It's always 10 or 30 or whatever years away. Well, high-speed rail in Canada has always been 10 or 20 or 30 years away. And during those 10 or 20 or 30 years, we should have put in things like rapid buses. Now you could make the buses hydrogen or electric buses, HOV lanes on the 401. We have all of the ingredients today. We just don't have the collective political will to fix this. So, Metro links in Ontario, the fiasco that there was with the Presto card. All of the different transit authorities were at war with each other, and TTC didn't want to get along with Presto. So we have schedules that don't align. We have, the number of post-secondary students that travel every day on the go. It's like 50% of their passengers, and we don't have a program that connects university campus to campus. It's like everybody's in charge, but nobody's in charge. So you need an integrated mobility system, which is, Uber, and we've had programs that worked really well, but nobody ever put them all together. Like we had a great Uber pilot in Innisfil. For example, it makes absolutely no sense to put all the money. We have one of the most expensive highways in the world being built between Sudbury and Barrie, the new 400. And we spend more on removing snow than we would on subsidizing a high-speed bus that would enable, people to connect from Sudbury. We have this Northland thing that never works. Fortunately, we're moving towards rail between connecting, I think, from Toronto to North Bay. But until people really feel that it's reliable, everybody, nobody wants to get out of their car. So the reason, back to your question, the reason everybody takes the train in Japan and Korea is because it works and you can rely on it. And once you can rely on it, then you forgo your second car. Once you do forgo your second car for 5 years or whatever, then you say, well, maybe I don't even need the first car. But until it's the chicken and egg, and Ontario and Canada, quite frankly, has never got its act together about collectively providing a useful, or not a useful, a high quality, reliable service for people. You see it with the TTC, that the ridership is declining and the people just don't feel comfortable on this TTC. It's dirtier, the people feel unsafe, the frequency has declined. And so when it comes to managing the TTC, the City of Toronto doesn't have much of a choice because they're the only ones really paying for it, and you end up getting this penny wise, pound foolish chopping up of different transit components. So yeah, so that's my little rant on transit. But it's not that hard to fix technically, not at all. We know what needs to be done, but it seems incredibly difficult to fix from a political perspective because it's local government, it's federal government, it's provincial government, it's agencies like Metrolinx. I mean, transportation in Ontario has been sliced and diced so badly, and nobody works with anybody.
Public policies is connected so strongly to public services, right? Like transport and utilities. Does any of your research go into the public policy side of things and how it's coupled to the technology that we're using?
Oh, for sure. I mean, as engineers, we love to think that we're the sharpest tool in the shed, and that it's if you get the technology right, everything else falls into place. But the technology is always the easy part. It's the public policy, it's the social license in the community, it's the willingness to pay, it's the day-to-day management of the system that's always the more difficult aspect. More challenging anyways. So yeah, if you don't look at public policy and you want to fix the system, you're not going to get very far.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you tell me a little bit about the public policy side of things here in Ontario and when it relates to energy, right? Or electricity specifically, and how when it comes to the ISO report that recently came out that we need to double our our net generation capacity, what changes in public policy can be brought to make that a reality?
So electricity in Ontario is fascinating as a history. I mean, if you travel the world and you talk to somebody randomly at a bar, maybe you can tell by their accent, but Canadians are the only people who call electricity hydro. So that's how you can pick them out, especially from Ontario and British Columbia and Quebec. So, I mean, even Ontario Hydro One, still the transmission company in Ontario, it all started with Niagara Falls and the ability to generate electricity. You know, the big fight between AC and DC, it was all fought over, you know, from electricity generated by falling water. Ontario we had tons of electricity because of, you know, the fall from all that water from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario. So we either did it at Niagara Falls or DQ Falls or wherever. And then we said, hey, we got really cheap energy. Why don't we get all these companies to set up shop along the Niagara River? And that's how Ontario really moved into manufacturing. And we purposely, as a public policy, we purposely underpriced electricity to try and attract industry. And we stuck with that as a national mentality. So Canadians, and the same thing happened in British Columbia and Quebec, Canadians have this sense that energy, that we have tons of it, and that it should be cheap. And so we've developed a society where, for example, we use twice as much electricity as a German. And the reason is because it's cheaper. So we brought in all these companies, they created businesses, then it drove in the automotive industry. But then we found out, we don't have enough hydro capacity. We need to increase electricity. And we had this big discussion as a province, what are we going to do? We could have bought hydro from Quebec, but we didn't really trust them, and probably a good thing. And that was the same time that the federal government was trying to convince collectively, you know, looking at nuclear. So Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick all went down the nuclear track. Ontario in a big way, and from total greenhouse gas emissions, it's a good thing Ontario did do that. Quebec, because they have so much hydroelectric capacity, they got out of nuclear to focus on hydroelectric generation, and that's how, you know, it's the largest source of revenue for the province of Quebec is hydro. So we still had this mindset that, hey, electricity is cheap, let's generate lots of it. So, you know, we had lots of projections where, you know, let's just build another nuclear plant. Let's start with Pickering and then Bruce and then Darlington. And should we have 10 more? Should we have 20 more? And that sort of came to an end when we started looking at the price. And we said, holy smokes. We also had governments change. And we had a big push for the Green Energy Act. And we said, well, you know, we had a couple ministers who traveled to Freiburg, Germany, and said, well, look at here, it's all sustainable. We need wind and solar. So we tried that. We found out that it was very expensive. We kind of always were looking for a magic bullet, and I don't think we ever really found it. Fortunately, you know, the base load, 20, 30% hydro was hugely helpful. And then we brought in, you know, we had up to 50, 60%, one time 70% of our electricity was nuclear. So that gave us always this buffer. Where challenges come in is Pickering closing, because that's 15% of the province's electricity generation right there. And at the moment, the replacement for that would all be gas, which will send our emissions significantly higher. And there'll be a huge fight between the province and the federal government on how do we pay for the carbon tax on that additional, additional greenhouse gas, CO2, the tonnages. So now we're looking at, hey, maybe we should rethink, because we originally were going to build a new large-scale facility at Darlington, and the province said no. And now we're revisiting the idea of expanding generation at Pickering B through refurbishment. And the problem is, or not the problem, the interesting, well, yeah, it is a problem. When you look at a reactor, a CANDU reactor, whether it's at Bruce, Darlington, or Pickering, you know, they're somewhere around 800 megawatts. And 800 megawatts is a lot of electricity. You need a lot of wind turbines or solar. The problem with replacing them with wind and solar is then you need an awful lot of storage. We have a little bit of pump storage at Niagara Falls. And we have a 20 megawatt pilot starting with a tour that's going to produce hydrogen, which you can use hydrogen as a wonderful storage medium. But when you start taking off, a generation capacity like a Pickering, you realize, wow, we're in big trouble, especially when you then have another report out from ISO, as you mentioned, that says, hey, we need to double our generation potentially. And while you're doing that, by the way, we need to start generating hydrogen to replace heavy-duty trucks, maybe shipping or whatever, so it becomes a big issue. The other big public policy issue that's facing Canada, but from an Ontario perspective, is that traditionally electricity has been the mandate of the province. Canada is one of the most decentralized federations in the world, and it's one of the very few jurisdictions where energy is determined provincially. You don't have that in the States, you don't have that in Europe. It's very much a national decision-making process. But here it's all done, so you have Quebec Hydro, you have Hydro One and Ontario Power Generation. So you have this very provincial energy system from the electricity generation. And that was okay because electricity is 30% of our total energy. And then Enbridge would come along and it would supply the natural gas. Shell or whomever would provide the gasoline and the diesel. But now this is changing from an energy perspective. We're saying, oh, wait a second. If we start electrifying transportation and we start moving from natural gas heating of our homes to heat pumps, then the overall contribution of the provincial sort of finger in the energy pie is significantly bigger. So that's a big issue. Then you have the federal government saying, oh, here's our net zero targets. And they're starting to say, well, wait a second. At the moment, almost all of the electricity transmission wires go north-south. Quebec sells all their electricity to the US. Why isn't there anything going east-west in Canada? So now the national government is trying to figure out how to beg, cajole, prod, bribe the provinces to work together better in terms of providing a new energy approach in Canada. And back to the discussion about transportation, the one thing Canadians aren't very good at is cooperating with our neighbors from a service delivery perspective. And we think we are. We think we're the sort of the Boy Scouts or the nice kids on the block. But we have incredibly rigid, relative to other countries in our same sort of economic standing, we have provincial barriers that if you took those same provincial barriers to the US, barriers between states, they would just shake their head. But we have this history of a siloed country that is going to have to be adjusted for energy. And we see the same thing with healthcare. And that's probably Canada's big challenge for the next 30 years is getting along better with our neighbors.
Yeah, so sir, you bring up some really interesting points about, how Canada needs to work better together, right? All the provinces, we need to work better together, and we're working on our own kind of unique silos. Is it because of our geography and, are other countries also facing the same dilemma?
Yeah, I mean, Canada's not unique in that. I mean, countries are always good at sort of fighting with each other. We're we're definitely worse than average. So let's say, for example, OECD, the rich country club. And that's it's just a quirk of our culture, I think, and the way the country was created. I mean, we have a constitution, for example, that doesn't really recognize cities. We have the lion's share of our government services provided through our cities, but cities are really at there's no other country that has sort of a tighter control province to cities. So there's that. That's a historic legacy of the way the country was formed. And then the provinces, by giving the provinces so much control over resources, they've kind of evolved into kind of separate entities. And then there was Quebec, there was the whole separation thing in the 70s and the 80s. Then now we have Alberta, and Alberta is going to become increasingly agitated in the Confederation because Alberta's economy is so closely linked to oil and gas. And it doesn't matter what the rest of Canada says for Alberta, really. It matters what the rest of the world says. And the rest of the world has said, we're moving away from fossil fuels. So the fight in Alberta is just how much of the sort of the remaining pieces of pie from oil and gas they can have. And they'll blame the rest of Canada as just as natural. And there's the challenge of if you wanted a pipeline, you have to go through provinces, and you have that challenge. There was a discussion about a transmission line from Newfoundland to Ontario that Quebec didn't want. So it's too easy to stop things you don't want in Canada. Yeah, that is. It's not unique, but it's probably more pronounced and has a greater impact in Canada than elsewhere.
Yeah, so I guess things are just headed down the path of least resistance. Tell me a bit about the whole movement of small modular reactors. And I know there's a lot of governments, a lot of provinces, provincial governments that are interested in pursuing this technology, like Saskatchewan, there's Alberta, and hey, Quebec has had a history of nuclear as well. So could you tell me a bit about your thoughts on this new movement, and will the provinces start working together better to make this a reality?
Maybe. So the interesting thing in Canada, CANDO was developed to a large extent by a federal government supported agency. So, everybody's complaining about why don't we have more CANDO? And basically the corporate structure of CANDO ran out of steam. And so we don't have new large-scale CANDO ready to go. So the nuclear industry has said, well, SMRs are kind of the way to go. And we have, GE Hitachi at OPG is planned, and they may well be the way to go, but there's still a lot of teething pains that need to be we need to get through. So for example, the previous model of nuclear was that the utility, whether it's New Brunswick Power or OPG, or that they took on the licensed responsibility for the facility. They were the ones who made the changes. Now an SMR is kind of subtly shifting to more of it's a bit like an airplane, where the airline is buying the airplane, and Air Canada doesn't provide too much significant design changes to a Boeing 777. They buy it, and it's a Boeing responsibility or an Airbus responsibility, and it's regulated thus and so, and you get the economies of scale of a Boeing or an Airbus because they're made in the factory and they make a lot of them. Now, SMRs will work in a way that requires a much greater appreciation for the purchase and place these facilities. Is it a 4-pack for OPG, these sorts of things. The challenge to some extent is that at the moment, the 300 megawatts, as big as you go, it's still pretty small if you want to start using that for the significant generation that we require. So I think you'll see SMRs for sure in things like heavy energy demand industries, steel, for example. It'll be an SMR there. You'll probably have, so for example, in Saskatchewan, the amount of electricity used is relatively small. So an SMR makes a lot of sense there, where 300 megawatts, you get 2 of them, you have the ability, one is offline, the other is still providing. It doesn't, if you take a Darlington out of the system, even one unit of 800 megawatts, that's pretty significant. It requires a lot of utility. It's almost like a dance card, right? You know, it's okay for you to have an outage, but then somebody else has to come online. And in Ontario, we're pretty well served by the end of the day. We can ramp up gas in a hurry, so we have a pretty robust system. But as you bring in more and more of these SMRs, you're going to need to figure out how they fit within the overall grid. And that's not quite figured out yet. So that's one aspect that has to be figured out. The second is, at the moment, you know, there's X Energy, there's NewScale, there's GE Hitachi, there's Westinghouse. Everybody's saying, look, my mousetrap's the better mousetrap. And if the SMRs are supposed to provide this huge economies of scale, then you're probably not going to have 5 or 6 or 7 vendors. It may be Boeing and Airbus, and who are the two? And that's going to take some time to figure that out. And the people of Ontario, for example, don't want to be the ones paying for the decision-making process of, you know, is it Boeing, is it Airbus, is it NewScale, is it GE Hitachi? So there is going to be some winners and losers. The other challenge that we have is CANDO really was financed by the government of Canada for the development, both the research and then the applications. How much money Canadians are going to be willing to provide as a subsidy to develop the research and then the application of a NewScale? GE Hitachi isn't Canadian. So you have this whole sort of the dynamics of the province and the federal government kind of deciding, you know, wait a minute, are those jobs here in my province? I'm sure that sooner or later GE Hitachi is going to be getting a call from the province of Ontario, or even from Clarington and Durham, saying, hey, wait a minute, how much of your facility will you manufacture in my jurisdiction? That's, you know, we have that with airplanes. So, you know, the government of Canada was going to buy some F-18s, but then we said, well, we'll only buy them if they're manufactured in Manitoba, these sorts of things. We have the same sort of screw up with regards to the ships. We have 2 shipping manufacturing, and we said, no, we want those jobs to go to either Quebec, or we want those jobs to go to the Maritimes or to British Columbia. So we get this meddling of who gets which jobs, who pays for this. This all has to work itself out. And we don't have a Canadian player in the SMRs. So we're going to see a lot of toing and froing and negotiating and, you know, conferences and chats over drinks at CNA conferences and all this sort of stuff for the next 5-10 years as people figure out what's going on. Now, the challenge that SMRs have, I think, or a challenge, is that who knows how serious we are as a world and as a country, but Canada is on the record for being net zero by 2050, 30 years. So
it's law, right? It's
law. Yeah. So if the Conservatives win and they say, well, we think that was a really stupid thing to say, that you know, to force us to be net zero by 2050, they have to change the law. So that means they have to win basically a majority, or else we get in this muddle and this mess about the carbon tax, and it's just, and it doesn't, to a large extent, it doesn't matter who wins politically in Canada. It matters what the global decision is to climate change, to climate mitigation. So, and we see south of us, the US has said, sorry, we're putting money on the table to meet our requirements. We see it in Europe, and increasingly we see it in China, we see it in India, and especially it's going to start happening in India and Africa and then Asia, because those countries are going to get hit by climate impacts more than Canada. So they're going to get angrier and angrier and angrier with Canada, because they'll say, hey, per person, you people have done more damage to the climate than anyone else on Earth, except maybe Saudi Arabia. step up. You need to reduce your emissions. And it doesn't matter what Alberta and Ontario, the fight there, it's going to matter what we as a country are able to collectively say as a community within the global nation of, global community of nations. So, okay, we may not make net zero by 2030, but there are an awful lot more countries that are making a stronger effort to reach that target than Canada. So, yeah, okay. So bottom line is clock is ticking and we ain't winning the race to decarbonize. So got 30 years left. You got this whole debate going on about SMRs, which one, how good are they? There's still a bunch of people, debating, no, we should go back to CANDU, let's get that thing ramped up again. We can't, I doubt we may get GE, Hitachi, the OPG thing on grid before 2030. We're not going to get much else before 2030. We're not going to get a larger scale. We might be able to refurbish Pickering and buy it before 2030, maybe, depends. Anyways, so this is the challenge I think that SMRs are going to face, is that there's still an awful lot of teething pains, if you will. 10 years, I think we have a decade of who's the winner, how do you regulate it, how do you operate it, how much does it really honestly cost? Because if there isn't one, it's hard to say this is, so got a decade. So now we have 20 years to get to this net zero by 2050. And in the meantime, we've got wind and solar that are going to be ramping up significantly. Ontarians love to complain about wind and solar. But really, the rest of the world is going wind and solar, hoping to find some kind of storage. So, but then there's an issue there because there's probably not enough metals, so you got to worry about the lithium, you got to find copper, you got to worry about all this kind of stuff. So we may ramp up with the Ring of Fire. Then you have all of the metals required for electric vehicles. So, I mean, the wind and solar, the strength of it is that it lends itself to decentralized systems. So for example, in Ontario, I think there's something like 4,000 or 5,000 megawatts being generated behind the grid that people don't even know about. So that's the part where if you start saying, okay, every house sold should have some solar panels, especially if you have an electric vehicle, start using the batteries within the electric vehicles, not just for, for getting rid of greenhouse gas emissions, but to increase the resilience of the overall system. Because don't forget that while all of this is happening, basically we're on our way to hell in the handbag kind of thing with regards to climate variability. Significant, today's the warmest day in recorded history for, what is it, February, whatever. Tomorrow is going to be again the warmest day. So every year, pretty well, you're going to be in the warmest day of history because things are warming up. Things are getting crazier. So, we have challenges with Tennessee Valley Authority. Last year or the year before, they had to shut down because they didn't have enough water in the river for cooling of their nuclear facility. We have algae in Lake Ontario that's threatening sometimes Pickering, so that's going to get worse. You have all of these exacerbating challenges while we're trying to phase out of fossil fuels. So, it sounds very grim and dire and all of that, but my goodness, now's the time to get into energy engineering, energy systems, because there will be 5 jobs for every potential graduate, without a doubt, because things are changing so fast and so dramatically that, I mean, wow, what a time to be in the business.
So 5 jobs, eh?
Easy. Well, assuming that you graduate with whatever.
Full-time, pensioned.
Oh, no. Welcome to the new world. I think pension is I think there's a, the world has changed and jobs are changing, and I think jobs are actually a bit of a reflection of this whole change to the energy system. So energy system in Ontario used to be, hi, we're we're Ontario Hydro, welcome to your big pension. We take care of all of the energy generation, all of the energy transmission. Trust us, we know. Well, there were some big problems. It got all, broke into 5 parts. Then we had Bruce Power to run, Bruce, which is still owned by OPG. But what's happening, this whole fracturing of the energy sector, and then you're gonna, it's gonna get even worse or more challenging, whatever, electricity, and then you're gonna have electric vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same kind of thing with our pensions and how people graduating today are going to have to get through life in terms of putting the pieces together for enough money here, enough money there. I don't think, it used to be, I suppose, not when I graduated, maybe, somebody would go to OPG and they would get a pension and they would be there for the rest of their life. I don't think that's the case anymore, for good or bad. And I think also the other big, at the start we were talking about what are the big trends. So we're still used to a world where Canada, in partnership with the other, it started as the G7, was the rich kid on the block. And basically those who pay the piper call the tune. So we, as rich countries, created the United Nations, the World Bank. We set the rules of the world. And in last century, that made sense because 80% of the wealth created last century was created by US, Japan, Canada, and Europe. This century, 80% of the wealth will not be created by those countries anymore. It's all Asia, Africa. That's who's making all the money. So us getting used to calling the shots and being rich enough, and we've grown as a society used to a 3% a year increase in wealth, in GDP. That ain't happening anymore. We're and the demographics of Canada, the demographics of the world, we're kind of like on the roller coaster that had this beautiful, this lovely acceleration, and now things are slowing down, and it feels crappy. We're grumpy.
Yeah.
So, we have the thing in Ottawa, the protests, this is a reflection of global forces at work where Canada's just not, thanks for your input, but you don't count nearly as much as you used to. And that's hard to accept. But it doesn't matter whether you accept it or not, it's reality. It's kind of like Alberta and the, shifting out of oil and gas. The question is, how fast?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a grim reality, and I think we're all experiencing that now with the economic downturn. And sir, tell me a little bit about why is that trend the case? Is it the fact that we're not manufacturing as much, and we're just a service-based industry now, or is it the fact that our immigration policies are, we're kind of depending on immigration to boost up our numbers rather than actually manufacturing and pushing our economy ourselves, right? And increasing birth rates naturally. What are your thoughts on this? Like, what are the factors?
Wow. Here? Well, that's a huge question. Okay, so productivity in Canada is declining faster than any other OECD country, and we keep getting warning, and to some extent we've been ignoring them. I think Canadians are much more interested in redistributing wealth than generating new wealth. Again, that's a cultural thing, I think, to some extent. So if you want to, most of our students, Waterloo with all of the clean tech, somebody we're as good as anybody in the world at good ideas and new products, new ventures, but they often get picked up by a company in the US that then, or Europe or whatever, that then, goes the next step and sort of commercializes it. Exactly. So that's a challenge that we have. But I want to take a step back in that if I had to pick a country today that is the best positioned country to win the 21st century, it's Canada. Because most of the challenges that we face, I would argue, are self-inflicted. So our productivity is not, there's no reason we can't improve this and fix this. We have one of the secret sauces, or the magic bullet that we have, is that we are actually pretty accommodating for new immigrants. And that will hold us in good stead because, yeah, demographically we're declining, but we're pretty good at integrating new people into our country and into our economy. That's strength number one. Strength number two is the two best countries positioned geographically to withstand climate change are Canada and Russia. And I would much rather be in Canada than Russia. We have water. Yes, we're going to have climate impacts, but our climate impacts are going to be a lot less severe than India and China and Africa. We have 1 billion climate refugees likely headed our way this century. So we can figure a way to be part of this. Where I think we need to figure this out is so, for example, the Wayne Gretzky skate to where the puck is going, right? The puck went to China, now it's going to India, and then it's going to go to Africa in terms of the demographic waves and the economic
boom, yeah.
Yeah. So why on earth are we not being far more aggressive in partnering with India? Why shouldn't a graduate of a university in Ontario have somehow a good understanding of India? Especially because the language, that's a country, 1 billion, this year, March, I think it is, India becomes the most populous country in the world. We have more Indian immigrants, I think, than any other country. We should build a partnership, a durable partnership, not like, hi, we're from Canada, you should hire us because we're smart. No, we have to be much more strategic and clever in partnering with countries in future development. Universities, businesses, instead of worrying about building 2 SMRs for Canada, think about building 25 SMRs and 20 of them are with India. And how does that work? Then similarly, we have got to partner with Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is going to be the biggest boom in terms of population, and we may not get rich by partnering with them, but if African cities in particular aren't developed sustainably, the whole world is going to be affected. So that's just smart in terms of both business, but in terms of self-preservation. So and I think we'll get there. We love to kind of moan and grumble in Canada, but at the end of the day, we're pretty good at eventually getting there. It's frustrating that by the time we do get there, we will have forfeited a lot of opportunity. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's not, it's bad, but it's reality, and it's not, also, we have kids your age. I don't think it's any harder to be, heading out into your careers now than it was, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Yeah, they had a pension, they had a nice house, this sort of thing. But there's not, it's different, and you can focus on what's been lost, but I think you also have to be fair and focus on what's been gained. I am just dumbfounded at I went to school without internet, and now there's internet and cell phones, and the possibilities that brings, it's just like, it boggles my mind. Yeah. And to grow up with that, it's like being born, being able to speak a whole different language. It's a big deal. And we can focus on what we lost, but I think we gained more than we lost, or you gained more than we. Easy for me to say. I have a pension, but I don't. Yeah, no, I don't. I would not. I don't feel sorry for kids graduating today. I think they may have it harder in certain areas, but they have it easier, maybe not easier, but more exhilarating. The world is going to change more in the next 30 years than it did in the last 70, both for good and bad. So it's just learning how to be more adaptive, I guess. There's probably never been a better time to get into the energy industry, unless maybe you were an oil, like the oil barons, the Rockefellers, and who all got rich by drilling for oil. That was a pretty heady time. But now there's so much happening and so fast. The energy sector is is undergoing fundamental changes. So now's the time to get into it, because boy, oh boy, you'll be busy in terms of things that you'll do and challenges that you'll face. And you'll basically have to do in 30 years what took 100 to get us here.
Yeah.
Good luck.
So tell us about a little bit more about that fast track in terms of a career in the industry, right? We're gonna have to do a lot more in less amount of time, and plus we don't necessarily have the capacity to do that across the world, right? It's not only in Canada. So tell me a little bit about international opportunities that might open up for people that are looking for that, or maybe even opportunities here domestically.
Sure. So, okay, easy for me to say, I guess, sitting, later on in life and all of that. But I don't think there's ever been, not in the last 100 years anyways, greater opportunity to either work internationally or domestically in finding a job as the world transitions in this whole energy transition. So we gotta get fossil fuels and carbon out of the system. Huge Herculean task. We got another one where we got to start changing the grid, hardening the grid, because we're going to start facing more climate impacts and more demand. So we got to fix that. And it's getting a bit old, so that all has to be addressed. Then we have, as I mentioned earlier, we got 1 billion people that don't have access to electricity. They're starting to get some money. They're starting to get a lot of desire. They need it in a hurry. So we have to figure out how to do that. Then we have another 3 billion, 4 billion that are getting the majority of their electricity, the majority of their energy, electricity and transportation fuel, from either coal or oil and gas, and all of that has to be shifted out. So that's a 30-year, that's a menu that's a pretty aggressive challenge. So even a country like Nigeria has signed on. So Nigeria's per capita energy use is, as I mentioned, about 1/100th of a Canadian's. Their electricity use is less than that. So they got to build all of this electricity generation and distribution capacity, because they want the same things as us. Maybe they'll be smarter and they'll figure out how to develop a lifestyle that doesn't require, however many 1,000 kilowatts that we use. Might be able to get away with 1/3 of what we use. We still want elevators and lights and refrigerators. Just getting from where they are now to that is a few hundred gigawatts, 1,000 gigawatts. So that's a big challenge. So they are looking for help, but they want to do it themselves, of course. So then it's, Canadians building partnerships, it's Canadian graduates figuring out, probably first and foremost is learn something in Canada, because there's no point going to Nigeria if you don't know anything to learn off of them. It's not exactly a good strategy. But there's all these companies. I mean, all of our consulting companies are extremely busy. They can't get enough people. So yeah, now's the time to graduate.
Yeah, so it seems like Ontario Tech is a great place for students.
Hard to find a better place, I think, in terms of nuclear and energy engineering. It's it's happening.
So with the students that you're seeing graduating and getting into the industry, where's their preference lying in terms of the energy industry? Is it all towards nuclear? Is it some of them heading towards the energy systems? Some joining ISO. What is it like?
Uh, Probably well, the nuclear engineering group that I have for capstone mostly is, there's only 30 graduating this year. And they're, not surprisingly, I want to go work at OPG, I want to go work at Bruce, maybe CNSC, maybe SNC, maybe Kinetrics. There's probably 100, 200 jobs for those 30 students out there. So they're going to have the ability to pick and choose, I think. Then you have all of the companies that are starting to figure out, wait a second, we're likely not to get as many people as we would like. So they have to change their systems used to be when I graduated, labor was not the constraint. There was 15, 20% unemployment. So you would keep people way longer. It would take you 30 years before you became a vice president of anything. You would get 100 letters telling you to get stuffed when you graduated. But eventually, if you found a job, you would do all right. You would stay with the same company because in 20 or 30 years, they would make you a vice president. Now, they may not make you a vice president right away at, say, OPG or Bruce or wherever, but it happens a lot faster. And things are far more transitory. There's more of there's a lot less thinking in graduating students, I believe, today that they think they'll be in the same company from the day they graduate to the day they retire. And that's probably smart. And I think that's good. I think it's healthy. It's a bit scary. I feel for graduates today because life is really different than what their parents and their grandparents went through, and it still isn't. We're pretty sure of what the ingredients are, and we even have an idea of the recipe to some extent for the next 30, 40 years, but we have no idea what the finished cooked product is. So whereas when you graduated in the 80s, the 70s, the 60s especially, you pretty well knew what your trajectory was. Now, not so much.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit scarier. Like you said, it's a bit of the unknown, right? Like, how can I map my career out by jumping different companies, right, or different utilities, or maybe the regulator. How can I diversify my portfolio to make myself a better candidate? So if Professor Hoornweg, a question that I have for you is, if you were a person that was entering the workforce in this day and age, what strategy would you deploy?
In industry, it's easy to say, hard to do, but I would worry less about where I am and how much I make and that sort of thing. I would pick jobs where I would have a preference for jobs where I felt valued. And that's a subtle thing, but people are smart enough to figure how that works. And that I felt that I could contribute and that I felt that I could learn. It's kind of like the Venn diagram, and pretty quickly employers where they are on that sort of that spread. And if really, especially if you graduate with an engineering degree or a credible university degree, do what you love and the money will take care of itself, because you will get a job eventually. It may not come right away. And if you focus on, people know the minute they meet you if you're happy. And if you're working for a company and you're grumbly about it because you don't think you're getting paid enough or it's not challenging enough. People know that. And so I would look for jobs, and everybody's different. Like what makes you happy is different, but you can find jobs, especially now because there are a lot, especially in the energy sector, where some jobs will give you more satisfaction, and I would gravitate towards those. I would also gravitate towards, so different segments of society have almost like a different language. So if you work for the private sector, like a startup, for example, is a different feel to the company. If you work for a local government, a municipality, or an LDC, it's a different feel to the place. Different feel to the place in, say, an OPG, and a different feel in a place like the CNSC as a regulator. As much as possible, I would try and get a sampling of those, because it's almost like learning different languages. And the more languages you have, the easier it is to travel around the world. And it's kind of the same thing with jobs. So, especially now, you don't have to be sort of stuck in the same job. But it also means, from a financial point of view, one of those, let's say you have that 4 groupings of jobs, the regulator, the LDC, the local government, private sector, and then the bigger utility a la OPG, Bruce, or the consulting groups. Each of them pays a little bit differently in terms of total remuneration, your paycheck, but then also your pension, your benefits, et cetera, et cetera. What training you can get varies at different ones. The thing to do is to be a lot more like the ant than the grasshopper. So when you have a job that's paying really well, don't have your lifestyle expand to fit that paycheck, because you want to be in a position where you can go to the next one that may, on the surface, have a marginally lower paycheck, but it's providing remuneration in a different way. So you want to be in a position that you can go from one to the other, and that you don't want to be beholden. And it's not easier said than done. As soon as you get a mortgage and 2.2 kids and these sorts of things, it becomes a challenge. But you can, you are the captain of your own life kind of thing, and you can without that much sacrifice. It may seem like a lot of sacrifice, but it isn't. I don't think it is that. It sort of, it's the marshmallow analogy of the kid with, if you hold off eating the second you'll get 2 marshmallow kind of thing. And I think you can do that with your career. You don't have to only go for the highest paying right away or only. You want to also go for the one that, that gives you the most fulfillment. And fulfillment isn't only the paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well said. And I was just reflecting on my own career and the opportunities that are available to me, and thinking about, hey, am I fulfilled in my job, right? And really processing that a little bit. So it really helps to your message really helps me reflect a bit on my own career journey and like what might be the next step, right? Yeah, so I think this was a great discussion, sir. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it, and I really enjoy getting this perspective from you because it's so unique. It's such a unique perspective on the world, right? Because it's what's happening now, right? And I think a lot of professors they may be stuck in the past with a lot of concepts and a lot of niche technical topics, but I love how you have that relevance and that recent look at topics like climate change, like public policy and energy. So I think everyone will appreciate this conversation, and I learned lots. Any last words you have to say for students or anyone else that might be watching this?
No, apart from, the challenges are pretty daunting, but we have the technical awareness on how to address them, and life is short. Have fun, but have fun responsibly. That's it. So, and I think everybody who's graduating once you make it through 4 years of university, you know what have fun responsibly means. Whether it's finding a job where you feel more fulfilled, working, or volunteering on the weekends or at night in a local charity or whatever. Life is short, and yeah, do something and have fun doing it. Do something meaningful and have fun doing it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.